Tim McGraw entered the American spotlight with a voice that felt both steady and wounded, a young man whose songs carried more truth than most people realized. At 58, he stands as one of country music's most enduring figures, yet the story behind that steady smile began long before the fame, in a childhood shaped by questions he was too young to ask. Viewers saw the confidence, the cowboy hat, the bright stages. Still, the boy inside him searched for a place to belong. As the years passed, success wrapped itself around Tim's life, but it never erased the memory of where he started. There was joy in the music he crafted. However, there was also a quiet longing, the same longing that shaped every note he ever recorded. He rose, he stumbled, he learned to trust himself. Yet the shadows of identity and expectation followed him even as he became a household name. Now, at 58, the truth of Tim McGraw's life is not only found in his triumphs, but in the moments he rarely speaks about. What hidden struggle shaped the man behind the music, and how did it change the course of his life forever? Tim McGraw's story began in the small towns of Louisiana, places where days felt slow and nights carried the hum of crickets outside thin window screens. He grew up in a modest home where money was watched carefully and dreams were held quietly, almost protectively, as if speaking them too loudly might cause them to slip away. His mother worked hard to keep life steady. Still, Tim sensed the unspoken worry that lived beneath her determination. It was a home filled with love, but it was also a home shaped by unanswered questions, questions that lingered in the corners of his childhood without form or explanation. Music entered his life early, not as an escape, but as a companion. He listened to country records that spun stories of longing, heartbreak, and hope, and even as a boy he felt something familiar in those voices. He strummed cheap guitars, sang along to the radio, and discovered that melodies held emotions he didn't yet have words for. Yet while music offered him comfort, it also highlighted a quiet truth he could never shake, the feeling that something in his own story was missing. He looked around at other families and wondered why his felt different, why certain pieces of his identity felt out of reach. As he grew older, the tension between joy and confusion deepened. Tim loved his mother fiercely, but he sensed the weight she carried each time he asked about his father. Eventually, he stopped asking, choosing instead to bury the ache beneath school, sports, and the early sparks of ambition. But the ache remained steady and silent, pushing him to search for answers he wasn't sure he wanted. Everything shifted the day he found the birth certificate. He was a teenager, old enough to understand the importance of a name, yet young enough to feel overwhelmed by what he saw. The name listed under father belonged to a well-known baseball pitcher, a man whose face appeared on trading cards and sports broadcasts. Tim stared at the paper, feeling the world around him pause. It was a moment filled with a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and a sharp sting of abandonment. The revelation did not offer clarity, only more questions that settled deep in his heart. When he eventually learned the truth, that Tug McGraw was his biological father, the emotional impact struck him in two directions. There was hope in knowing where he came from, hope in the possibility of connection. Still, there was hurt in realizing how long he had lived without that piece of himself, how many moments had passed without acknowledgement or support. Tug did not step easily into Tim's early life, and the distance between them created a wound that music alone could not heal. Yet behind the pain lived a powerful understanding, the kind that forms in children who grow up searching for a place to belong. That longing, quiet and persistent, became the heart of Tim's songwriting. It shaped his empathy, his instinct to look beyond surface smiles, his ability to pour truth into lyrics that touched millions. The micro payoff of his early struggle was not closure, but a voice that carried both vulnerability and strength. It was the voice of someone who knew what it meant to want answers, yet learned to keep moving without them. Tim McGraw arrived in Nashville in the early 1990s with more determination than certainty, carrying a handful of songs, a worn guitar, and the steady belief that music could offer him a future he had only imagined. Nashville was loud, crowded, competitive, yet Tim walked through its streets with a quiet resolve. He worked long hours, played small gigs, and learned to navigate the relentless current of a city built on dreams. For a young man who once felt invisible, the chance to be heard meant everything. Still, it also brought a new awareness of how quickly hope could fade if he faltered. His early recordings did not make an immediate splash, but he refused to step back. Instead, he poured more of himself into the craft, sharpening his voice, strengthening his discipline, and learning how to transform personal truths into melodies. The turning point came with his self-titled debut album, a project that hinted at his potential but also exposed the vulnerability of an artist standing at the edge of possibility. It was his next album, Not a Moment Too Soon, that changed everything. When it reached listeners across the country, Tim felt the shift, the moment when his voice stopped echoing in small rooms and began filling stadiums. Success came fast, and with it came a weight he had never felt before. Fans saw a rising star, confident and polished. But privately, Tim understood that visibility carried responsibility. For the first time, he felt the pressure of being truly seen. Childhood insecurities, once quiet, stirred again as the world watched him with admiration and expectation. Fame illuminated his talent, yet it also magnified every doubt he had carried since boyhood. Each performance demanded more energy, more presence, more of the emotional honesty that had shaped his songwriting. During this whirlwind, he crossed paths with Faith Hill, a fellow artist whose warmth matched his determination. Their connection deepened with time, becoming a source of grounding in a world that often felt too fast and too bright. Their marriage offered him stability, the kind he had longed for as a child. Becoming a husband, and later a father, gave him a sense of belonging he had spent years searching for. Home became a place where he could exhale, where he felt seen not for the spotlight but for the person he was beneath it. Yet the glow of success cast long shadows. Touring demanded months of separation from home. Recording required long nights, creative strain, and the pressure to deliver songs that reached deeper each time. Tim understood the privilege of his career, but he also felt the sacrifices it asked of him. Every milestone came with an emotional cost. He missed moments with his growing family, and he carried the tension of balancing fame with the quiet need for personal stability. Despite those challenges, success steadied him. The music anchored him, his family grounded him, and the audience reminded him that the vulnerability he shared had value. Still, through every award, every sold-out show, every magazine cover, he felt a whisper of earlier insecurities. The boy who grew up searching for identity lived inside the man the world celebrated, reminding him that fame could never fully protect him from fear or doubt. As Tim McGraw moved deeper into the height of his fame, the world saw a man in control, a performer who gave everything he had to every stage he stepped on. His voice was steady, his presence confident, his discipline admired. Yet behind the bright lights and demanding schedules lived a quieter truth, one he carried with a mixture of shame and fear. Alcohol had followed him into adulthood, the way uncertainty had followed him through childhood, settling into his life so gradually that he convinced himself it was manageable. At first it felt harmless, something he could balance with work, family, and ambition, but slowly it grew into a presence he could no longer deny. Life on the road intensified the problem. Long nights, heavy pressure, and the emotional strain of constant visibility created a storm he tried to outrun. Each drink softened the noise around him, but it also dulled the clear sense of self he had worked so hard to build. The man on stage seemed strong, but the man backstage battled with a dependency that began to erode the foundation he had formed with such care. It was a burden he hid from the public, even as it tightened its grip with every passing year. The breaking point came in 1997 during a performance in Canada. Tim collapsed on stage, a moment that shocked those who witnessed it yet never made headlines in the way modern scandals often do. It was not a spectacle, only a frightening reminder that the body cannot hide what the heart is unwilling to confront. He recovered quickly and returned to work, insisting it had been exhaustion, but privately he understood the warning. His life, once shaped by the longing of a fatherless boy, was now shaped by the possibility of becoming the kind of man he had once feared. Instead of seeking help, he pushed forward, hoping momentum would outrun consequence. Faith Hill saw what he tried to hide. She watched his late nights grow heavier, his exhaustion deepen, his spirit dim beneath obligations. He rarely paused to question. Her concern did not come from judgment, but from love, the kind that refuses to stay silent in the face of danger. She urged him to choose life, to choose their family, to choose himself. Tim heard her words, but change did not come easily. Breaking an addiction meant facing his own pain without a shield, and the thought of that terrified him. Years later, when he finally spoke publicly about his battle with alcohol, it was not done for applause or sympathy. It was an act of survival, a moment of truth, where he acknowledged the depth of his struggle and the cost it had demanded. Sobriety became his turning point, the line between the life he almost lost and the life he still had a chance to rebuild. Yet even as he embraced clarity, the emotional cost lingered. Recovery was not a single moment but a long road, marked by quiet reckonings with himself and the memories he carried from childhood into adulthood. This tragedy was not the absence of pain but the presence of honesty. Tim learned that strength was not the ability to endure silently, but the willingness to confront what threatened to undo him. His music deepened, his relationships stabilized, and his sense of purpose sharpened. Still, the weight of what he survived remained a part of him, a reminder of how easily a life can drift toward darkness. When Tim McGraw stepped into sobriety, he did not enter it with triumph or certainty. He entered it with humility, with the quiet awareness that rebuilding a life requires more courage than fame ever demanded. Sobriety asked him to examine the parts of himself he had long avoided, the insecurities shaped in childhood, the pressure carved by fame, and the fear that had once followed him into every performance. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came in small moments, the kind most people never see, moments where he chose clarity over escape, presence over distraction, and honesty over the silence that had nearly cost him everything. He began to rebuild his routines with deliberate care. Morning workouts replaced restless nights. Healthy habits replaced indulgence. The physical transformation that later captured public attention was never about vanity. It was a sign of discipline, a way to keep himself anchored when the world around him continued to spin with constant demand. Fitness became a form of therapy, giving him structure and grounding as he learned to live without the crutch he once relied on. The more he committed to his health, the more he realized how much of his earlier life had been spent trying to outrun his own reflection. At home, he worked just as carefully to restore what truly mattered. Faith Hill remained his steady companion, offering support not through grand gestures but through presence. Together they created a space where honesty was not feared but welcomed, where the past was acknowledged without allowing it to define the future. Parenthood deepened that sense of purpose. Becoming a father allowed Tim to rewrite a story he once believed was unchangeable. Every game he attended, every conversation he slowed down to have, every celebration he showed up for became a quiet promise to his children, the promise of presence, something he had once longed for in his own youth. As the years unfolded, Tim found that clarity changed not only his personal life but his artistry. The music he created after embracing sobriety carried a tenderness shaped by real struggle. Albums released in his later career revealed a man who understood vulnerability not as weakness but as testimony. His voice gained a new depth, steady yet reflective, carrying the weight of everything he survived. Fans heard it, felt it, and responded to it, sensing the emotional honesty woven into every lyric. The boy who once searched for belonging had grown into an artist unafraid of truth. Touring felt different after recovery. He performed with intention rather than urgency, valuing connection over perfection. Backstage, there were no blurred memories, no shadows creeping at the edges. He stood in front of thousands with clarity in his eyes, knowing he had earned every moment with a fight most people would never fully understand. He found joy again, not in the noise or the spotlight, but in knowing he could walk off stage grounded, steady and fully present for the life waiting beyond the music. Professionally, reinvention became a natural extension of healing. Tim explored new collaborations, pushed creative boundaries, and embraced storytelling with renewed sensitivity. Each project reflected a man who no longer needed to prove his worth through constant work. Instead, he could choose projects that aligned with who he had become. The shift was subtle yet powerful, a sign that strength now came from balance rather than drive. This period in his life was simple but profound. Healing gave Tim McGraw the ability to stand firmly on his own 2 feet, not as the rising star the world once met, but as a man who had walked through pain and emerged with clarity. His life no longer revolved around endurance, it revolved around intention. At 58, Tim McGraw stands in a place he once wondered if he would ever reach, not because of fame or longevity in the industry, but because there were years when his life felt fragile, pulled between the pressure of public expectation and the private battles he fought in silence. Now, as he looks back, he sees his journey with a clarity that softens the sharp edges. The applause that once defined him no longer carries the same weight. What matters is not how loud the world cheered, but how deeply he learned to understand himself along the way. Fame, once the mountain he climbed with fierce determination, looks different from this vantage point. Tim views his past successes with respect rather than pride, knowing that many of his accomplishments came during seasons when he felt far from whole. He does not dismiss those achievements, but he no longer lets them measure his worth. Instead, he measures his life through the moments that never made headlines. The quiet mornings with Faith, the late-night talks with his daughters, the steady rhythm of a home that grew stronger because he learned how to stay present. Family is his anchor now. Each passing year deepens his gratitude for the people who held him steady through every phase of his life. He chooses his health with intention, knowing how easily he once drifted away from it. He trains not to prove strength, but to protect the years he still has. Sobriety has given him both time and clarity, and he guards them carefully. In these later chapters, he has learned the power of forgiveness of others, of life, and most importantly, of himself. The anger he carried as a younger man has softened, replaced by an understanding that every struggle shaped him into someone capable of deeper love. His music reflects this transformation. Recent songs carry the tone of letters written to his younger self, letters filled with truth, vulnerability, and wisdom earned through pain and perseverance. He no longer sings from the urgency of youth, but from the steadiness of a man who knows how quickly life can change. His voice may have matured, but its emotional weight has never been stronger. Each lyric holds a message to the boy who searched for belonging, the young artist who climbed too fast, and the man who nearly lost himself along the way. Aging does not frighten him the way it once might have. Instead, it brings purpose. He embraces the lines on his face, the shift in his energy, the quieting of the years, because each sign of age is proof that he lived long enough to experience them. There is a softness in him now, a gentleness shaped by survival. He moves through life with intention, valuing the present more than the momentum of the future. 58 is not a shadow of who he was. It is the culmination of who he became. This period of his life shows that Tim McGraw did not fall, fade, or break beneath the weight of his own history. He endured, he grew, he learned to stand with a grace that comes only from facing darkness and choosing to walk toward light. At 58, he is not a story of tragedy. but a story of resilience, a reminder that the hardest battles often lead to the most profound transformations. In the end, his story feels like a quiet ripple that never stops moving outward. From those early days shaped by instability and longing, to the bright, blinding rise of fame that carried him far from everything familiar, his journey traces a single unbroken thread, a boy searching for safety, for understanding, for a place where his heart could finally rest. Every triumph carried the echo of what he had once survived, and every setback reminded him how fragile a life can be when built on childhood wounds that never fully healed. Yet there is something undeniably hopeful in the way he kept reaching for connection, even when the world misunderstood him. The man he became, gentle, gifted, complicated, was shaped not only by hardship but by a deep, persistent desire to love and be loved. And maybe that is why his story still touches so many. It invites us to wonder how our earliest battles prepare us for the lives we eventually build, and how they shadow us long after the applause fades. For more emotional stories, check out this video.